This is Terry Wager. This is my vlog for February 16th, 2015. The time right now is 8:34 p.m. I have to look at the time on my computer here. On my I'm starting this vlog right now because about 10 minutes ago, sting off that came from this direction from one of these apartments on this side, deliberately and intentionally. Once he got in front of my apartment, he started stomping very loudly, but in a walking manner. And he walked this way, he walked this way, got in front of this apartment, and he stopped, and then he started running back this way, and he was majorly stomping while running. So there's a difference between running and stomping. Now keep in mind, I'm on the second floor in this apartment building. There's a catwalk out here that he did this on, and if somebody's jumping or stomping on that catwalk out there, I can not only hear it, but it causes the floor in here to vibrate when they walk. So I can usually tell if somebody's walking in front of this catwalk here, because I can usually, even if I can't hear it, like if they're deliberately trying not to be noticed, I can still usually feel the vibration of it because it vibrates the floor. So, but I have already pointed out on past vlogs that I'm surrounded by sting operatives that are deliberately and intentionally using provoking and harassment and terrorizing tactics. They're not really trying to hide it from me. They know I already know, so they're not really trying to hide it from me. The thing is actually catching them in the act on video. It's near impossible. I just have this this crappy ass cell phone that I purchased at Best Buy. It's a prepaid track phone cell phone. It's the cheapest one that they have. It's like, I don't know, $30 or something at the time. When I first purchased it, and it has limited recording capability. It has crappy resolution. My porch light out here don't work, and when the sting operatives are doing this shit at night, and it's nighttime right now, it's dark out. When they do this shit, the apartments on either side, they leave their front lights out as well. So the catwalk out there is, for the most part, completely dark. If I went out there with this cell phone, with the limited recording capability of the cell phone, it wouldn't really catch shit. You might see some, if the porch lights, if this apartment's lights is on and that apartment's lights on, then you might be able to see something. You might be able to see the person, may not be able to see the person clearly if I went out there to confront them. But the recording capabilities of this crappy cell phone is really crappy. Well, they just did this about 10-15 minutes ago. I already had a vlog recorded on this cell phone, so I couldn't instantly grab my cell phone. I didn't have the recording space on the cell phone when this incident happened. I already had a vlog on this cell phone that I had to take off of here, and I put it onto the computer, and I'm now changing the format of it so that it can go onto YouTube. But I had to take the time to actually unload the video off of this cell phone that I'm holding right now, and to get it onto this computer so that I could free up the memory on the cell phone to start recording right now. Now, the moment I go for my cell phone, they stop doing it. So they basically they just go in front of my apartment, and they'll stomp walk past my apartment, stop, and then they'll stop, run back like that, and then they'll stop just over there in front of this apartment that's right next door over here. So they're deliberately and intentionally just going back and forth like that. And then they did this like 3 different times, and then they stopped because he walked stomped this way, stopped in front of the apartment next door here, and then stomped, run this way, and then stopped in front of the apartment next door there, and then he walked back and stomped again. And he either went down the stairs or he went into this apartment, and I don't know where he went from there. He deliberately and intentionally stomp. They deliberately and intentionally stomp when they go in front of my apartment. It's their attempt to provoke me into confronting them. Now, I've already proved on video in 2009 that I was surrounded by a sting operation then, and my wife's lover, Officer Eric Carlson, and his partners were directly involved in that, and they were deliberately terrorizing me and harassing me and provoking me while being outside of my apartment. They were quite literally hanging out in front of my apartment, and they were going back and forth in front of my apartment. And they were deliberately and intentionally making false accusations about me while doing this. So it's like being ganged up on by a group of several people that are using that are deliberately and intentionally provoking and harassing right at my place of where I live. Now, I was severely debilitated at this time. I was physically unable to confront them. I could barely talk and barely walk at the time because they already poisoned me. Well, they were doing this with the intent of trying to get me to go outside to confront them, with the intent on their part of just outright shooting me. Well, so this is a continued tactic that they've used over and over again. The police department and the county sheriffs have taken over this apartment right here. They have taken over that apartment right there. They've taken over the apartment directly below mine, and they have the surrounding other apartments with their civilian operatives. They have changed out their operatives, usually when I catch them in the act on video doing something illegal. I proved last year in 2014 that every time I set foot out of my door that I am being accosted by civilian operatives that were deliberately and intentionally using street theater performances to attempt to make me look like a bad guy. And I proved this on video. I literally, it was a repeated process they were using then, that their civilian operatives were using. They would literally wait in ambush to ambush me at the bottom of the stairs here, because I have to take these stairs, either this stair that's over here or this stair that's over here, to leave this apartment. And both the stairs that I have to take to leave this apartment bottlenecks directly below this apartment, in front of the apartment that's right directly below mine. And that is the apartment the police department had their civilian operatives in last year. And those civilian operatives were deliberately and intentionally ambushing me at the bottom of the stairs using street theater sting performances. The best way I could explain it to you in a sense where you can understand what I'm talking about is, imagine trying to leave your home and then some bitch that is dressed like a whore approaches you and is deliberately trying to time it so that they arrive at the bottom of the stairs as you're going down the bottom of the stairs. And then they deliberately make conversation with you just so that they can make you look like a John for their video surveillance purposes. You're not a John. You're not doing anything wrong. You're not breaking any law. You're just trying to leave your home to go do your own thing. And then the sting operatives just literally ambush you for the purpose of making you look bad for their video surveillance. Now, they don't have to make a person look like you don't have to be a bad guy whatsoever for them to make you look like a bad guy on their video surveillance and or on their photogenic photos. All they have to do is have one of their civilian sting operatives dressed like a fucking whore and then ambush you in conversation when you try to leave your home or when you try to go to your home. Well, that isn't exactly what they were doing to me, but I'm giving you that reference because everybody's familiar with police prostitution stings. Everybody's familiar with that tactic. Okay, everybody already knows police take over entire hotels or entire motels for their sting operatives to operate in. Well, guess what? They'll take over an entire apartment building for the purpose of framing or entrapping people as well. And apartment managers, just like hotel managers and motel managers, apartment managers cooperate with any and all police sting operations. And this is that's how they get away with it. Now, they're not trying to frame me as a John. They're not trying to, nothing like that. They're trying to frame me as a pedophile. The reason why is because they had my wife turned against me. They had our daughters turned against me. They recruited my wife into this shit when she worked at the County Jail Kitchen as a prep cook. My wife, in turn, recruited our daughters into it. So for all intents and purposes, they became whores and girlfriends to people in law enforcement, and thus became civilian sting operatives. And they decided, since they had my wife and daughters to lie for them, they decided they're going to set me up as a pedo. And they were using police officers and county sheriff officers and civilian operatives of theirs to act as doubles to commit and or to stage crimes. And they were using their civilian operatives to back up false complaints and to point blame at me. And of course, this was all happening behind my back. I didn't even know any of this was even occurring. Most of the things that they did that they were setting me up for, I'm unaware of. I'm aware of a few of the things they were setting me up for, but I'm not aware of all the things that they were setting me up for. Suffice it to say that it was a continued effort on their part, where they were staging crime after crime after crime after crime, and each and every time it was sting operatives and law officers that were staging and or committing the crime. Some of the crimes they committed, they were staged by the sting itself. Other crimes they committed against actual real victims that are not a part of the sting. So I would say it's about 50-50. Half the crimes they were committing, it was just all staged and faked by the sting operatives, and they just had their civilian operatives back up complaints. Whereas the other half of the crimes they were committing were either actually committing crimes where they're actually causing real harm to real victims. In each and every case, in each and every incident that they were doing this shit, it was them committing all the crimes, and they were using sting tactics to do it. And each and every time they were using somebody as a double. I've discovered quite a bit about their sting operations. I have quite a bit of audio evidence of my wife and her family members meeting up and hooking up with these law officers, and how they have sexual relations with these officers, and how they discuss the crimes they commit with one another, and how they literally discuss and brag about who they're setting up and how they did it and all this kind of shit. Cops literally brag to their whores, their girlfriends, to who they're framing, who they're targeting, how they did it. They talk about using doubles. They talk about taking photogenic photos when they use doubles, and they're talking about video surveillance that they have, and they talk about what parts of their video surveillance they want to have erased because they're on their video surveillance. So they'll erase sections. They'll talk about how they erase sections of their own video surveillance where they know they committed the crimes. So they'll say they want this section erased or they want that section erased. And they openly discuss this shit amongst their whores and their girlfriends. Their civilian whores, their civilian girlfriends. They discuss this shit with these people. Now notice they're not doing it right now. But they were majorly doing it before I started recording. They don't want me to prove on video unless they think I'm going to go out. If they think I'm going to go out there to actually confront them, they'll probably do it again. And I'm very inclined right now to do just that. As a matter of fact, I should probably get my shoes on. I know I'm under illegal video surveillance by these motherfuckers in this apartment. If I get my socks or shoes on, which is I probably can't see because of the shadows over there, but it's on the floor. Right there and right there is my shoes and socks. Because I'm not even prepared to go outside at all. I don't have any fucking shoes on or anything. If they think I'm liable to actually go out there to confront them, then they're probably they would probably be very inclined to do it again, even if I'm recording. But they wouldn't have any intention of actually letting me live. Suffice it to say, if I go out there to confront them, they'll just pretend I'm a bad guy for their video surveillance, just like cops always do, and then they'll put on an immediate pretense of some sort of wrongdoing on my part, and then they'll just open fire. And that's usually how cops murder people. They just pretend people are bad guys, and then they just start yelling orders at you. And they can be conflicting orders. It's all for show for their video surveillance purposes. And then they just open fire. And then they just claim and fake justification like they always do. Cops don't prove people are bad guys. They just make their victims look like bad guys so that cops can look justified in murdering people. And news media, for all intents and purposes, are civilian sting operatives. And those people are buddies to people in law enforcement. And they do everything in their power to suppress any and all real complaints on cops and on how organized they are in their framing and or murdering of people. And when cops murder off people, what does news media allow cops to do? News media allows cops to label the murdered victim as mentally ill, and at no time does anybody cross-examine those cops in a criminal courtroom because they're never prosecuted, because prosecutors simply refuse to prosecute cops. So they don't fear these cops and their civilian operatives don't fear prosecution at all. They know if a civilian calls 911 to charge a cop with a felony crime, they know damn well they're not going to take the complaint, they're not going to act on the complaint, and it will not be publicly reported on the news. What usually ends up happening when a civilian calls 911 to charge a cop with a fucking crime, what usually happens is several cops show up pretending they're showing up to take the complaint, but instead of taking the complaint, what they do is the cops start pretending you're a bad guy. And then they just batter you to death. And then police simply refuse to tell media that they're responding to your 911 call, and police just label you as mentally ill and label you with obstruction of justice, disturbing the peace. They'll make up whatever fabricated accusations they want to make you look like a bad guy and to make cops look justified. And then news media only gives the cop side of the story. Now, because of this practice, this established practice that police and news media use to cover one another, they don't fear prosecution at all. Now, this harassment and provoking tactics that they're using, this is a common tactic that police have used for decades. They're trying to provoke their target. They have me surrounded with their operatives, whether they be plainclothes officers or civilian operatives. And in my situation, it's a combination thereof. And the reason they use these provoking and terrorizing tactics is because they're trying to provoke me into getting off of this chair and to go out there and confront them. The reason why is because they have every intention of just murdering me, and then and like I said, 99% of the time when cops murder somebody, they don't recognize the complaints of the person they murder. They only tell people, news media only tells people what the cops tell the news media to tell people. And the only thing the cops will say is, oh, he's mentally ill. Oh, he was acting crazy. He's on drugs, blah, blah, blah. They'll say all kinds of shit like that to vilify their victim. And they'll make no mention of the fact that I'm being harassed and terrorized by sting ops, and I'm fucking reporting it, and I've been reporting it all over the internet. I've reported it publicly. I've reported it by calling people. I've reported it by calling 911. I gave up in 2009 calling 911. Calling 911 does not get help at all. At all. It got my wife's lover and 3 of his buddies to my door is what it got. And they weren't there to help. And they weren't hiding that fact that they're not there to help. So they were flaunting the fact that calling 911 does not get help. They've already demonstrated that to me repeatedly. I've given up completely on calling 911. Calling 911 is a fucking joke in the state of Oregon. It doesn't get help. It gets organized killers to my door that'll immediately start putting on a pretense of me being a bad guy. Imagine calling 911 to report a crime. I have to. It's done formatting that video, so I have to tell it that it's done. That's a previous vlog that I recorded a couple of days ago. I just haven't gotten around to uploading it to YouTube yet because, like I said, I'm disabled. I'm not a healthy man here. I am disabled. I am partially paralyzed. I bleed internally. I'm in severe pain. I am severely debilitated. I'm over 50 years old, but I don't deem myself a wimp by any fucking measure of the goddamn word, but at the same time, I'm a realist, and I know damn well I'm severely debilitated from being poisoned by these people. I could probably muster a fight if necessary, but it wouldn't be much of a fight because of, not from the damage that they could do to me, but because of the damage they've already done to me by poisoning me. In other words, I'm already mortally wounded by these people. Any exertion on my part will trigger severe internal bleeding. So, yeah, I'm not in a very good situation health-wise. I don't deem myself as a fucking wimp. I'm not a wimp. I never have been a wimp in my entire life. I'm used to standing up to criminals and bad people. I have a history of saving lives. I have a history of putting my own neck on the line to save lives. I've never been a part of government. I've never worked in a government in any type, fashion, way, shape, or form with government. Well, wait a minute. No, that's not true. I worked as a Christmas casual one time at a post office. At the post office warehouse, the main warehouse near the airport. I worked one time as it wasn't even that's not even a full-time job. It's like, it's a seasonal job, and I did that one time. But I don't deem, other than that, I have no connections with government whatsoever. Other than that one time, and that was only for one season. In other words, I worked there for about, I don't know, like 2 months, I think. And then the season was pretty much ended after the Christmas Day. The season pretty much ended, and they got rid of all their seasonal workers. So if you consider that to be governmental job, I guess you could call that one. But other than that, I've always worked at private corporations or nonprofit corporations, usually in manufacturing or in entertainment businesses, manufacturing businesses. I've worked as a foreman at one place for 9 years. I ran a crew of over 40 plus people, had to make schedules for, had to train, had to teach how to use equipment, and I was responsible for the safety of the place. And I was, for all intents and purposes, for all practical purposes, I was a quasi-manager in the sense that I had to take on the responsibilities of a manager, even though I didn't carry the title of, or I didn't have the title of a manager. I had the title of a foreman. But when the managers weren't there, for all intents and purposes, I was the big boss pretty much. And I'm used to dealing with emergency situations and having to handle emergency situations. I have saved lives in the past. There's other jobs that I worked where I worked in a manufacturer capacity, where I was worked at oh gosh, how do you describe that? Where they make the phone books at and places like that. The binderies, where they have the binderies where they actually make the phone books and stuff like that. I worked in a place like that, and I used to drive forklift and basically did essentially warehouse work and manufacturing work, a combination of both. Jobs like this. For a year I worked on a dock where I loaded and unloaded trucks and stuff like that. So, I'm the type of person that's very safety conscious. I'm a very safety conscious person, always have been, and I'm by no means, I'm an average person in essence. I never realized that sting ops did this kind of shit to people, and most people. I'm going to have to assume that most civilians are simply unaware of these tactics and unaware of how corrupt law enforcement and their buddies and their relatives and their girlfriends really are, and how evil and vindictive these people are, because they treat the shit that they do to people, they treat it like it's a damn sport. And when my wife got the job at the County Jail Kitchen as a prep cook, she was recruited into an affair with somebody in law enforcement. I didn't know who it was at the time, and I wasn't even trying to find out who it was, because I loved my wife at the time, and we had 3 children, and I didn't want the family to be broke up because my wife was cheating. And I actually deemed my wife back then as my best friend. I deemed her that way. I thought of her that way. And I wanted to forgive her, and I was actually trying to find excuses to forgive her back then, because I deemed her my best friend. So I just looked the other way on it and just said nothing, because I cared about her. Like I said, she was not only my wife to me at that time, I deemed her to be my best friend. I always told her she was my best friend, and I deemed her that way. So, even if she felt the need to cheat for whatever fucking reason, then I was willing to look the other way on it for the benefit of the family. And I didn't say a damn thing about it. I never did at that time. I've never confronted her over that. The whole time I was trying to think in terms of what's best for the family. And so I never confronted her. Well, after she worked there for a month and a half, she quit. And the day she quit is the day that she and her side of the family was recruited into a sting operation, of which they were on board with, with the county sheriffs and the Portland Police Department. And their sting operation was all about targeting me and everybody on my side of the family. Now, I didn't realize that day that they were targeting other members of the family. But I did discover that I was the target of a sting operation that day because my wife and her family, everybody on her side of the family, was celebrating it in front of my face, and they were having fun hinting at it. And none of them were keeping track of the hints that they were giving me. And they gave me more hints than they intended to give me. And my wife's mother, who was also celebrating this in front of me, she just outright blurted it out. So they were essentially making it known via hints that they're celebrating something. They were openly celebrating the county sheriff's decision to frame me as a pedophile. And they were openly celebrating this in front of my face. And I was asking them, I specifically asked them, what are you all celebrating? And they were grinning and smirking like fucking evil Cheshire cats and were hinting at it. And like one member of my wife's family would hint at it when the other members were with my wife inside the apartment. And then when other members of the family were hinting at it to me, the previous family member that already gave me a hint wasn't there. So they're not keeping track of the hints they're giving me, and they're not hearing the hints that the other family members of theirs were giving me. They were all having fun hinting at it and implying at it, and they gave me a lot more hints than they intended to. They obviously didn't want me to know, but they gave me so goddamn many hints that it was easy to figure out. And like I said, my wife's mother just blurted it out. She just blurted it out right in front of me. My God. And when I walked away from these people, keep in mind, everybody on my wife's side of the family came over to my apartment and on my property were celebrating the fact that the county sheriffs were setting me up as a pedophile and that they were all on board with it and that they were having fun hinting at it in my presence. Now, I had enough information to know that I'm being targeted by a sting. I didn't think of it in terms of a sting yet at that time, but I knew it was a criminal conspiracy. And I was immediately suspecting the reason for it because of my wife was cheating with somebody in law enforcement. So I already knew their motive. I knew their mindsets behind it, and they were treating it like it was a fucking sport, and really didn't give a shit if I knew or suspected. They were trying to hide it from me, but any attempt to hide it from me was half-assed. Now, when I in shock, walked away from these people, headed into my apartment, and as I was walking away from them, to get away from these people that are clearly enjoying the fact that I'm going to be fucked over somehow, and we're having fun hinting at it in my presence. As I walked away from them, heading back into my apartment, they all started talking about it, thinking I can't overhear them. I was overhearing them just fucking fine. I'm discovering that they're setting me up as a pedophile. I'm discovering that my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement is going to be taking over the surrounding apartments, surrounding mine, and obviously everybody on my wife's side of the family, including my wife, is involved in this, and we're a party to it, and that this is what they're celebrating. So obviously they're on board with it. And I'm discovering all of this the day of its inception, because this is the day the county sheriff made the decision. Now, the very next morning, I checked my neighbor's door. Like around, 9:30 that morning, I got up, started a pot of coffee, and then I went outside, and I looked over at our neighbor apartment's door, and sure enough, there's a fucking 72-hour notice on it at 9:30 in the morning, of which wasn't there the day before. So this was my that was my confirmation that everything that my wife and her side of the family were celebrating the day before, that 72-hour notice on that door was my confirmation that everything that I overheard is coming to pass. So I knew my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement. The same day my wife quit her job at the County Jail Kitchen, the same day my wife and her whole side of the family were celebrating the county sheriff's decision to frame me as a pedo, is the exact same day the county sheriffs filled out paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments, and it's the very next morning they're executing the 72-hour notices on people's doors. That should give you enough of an indication to know that I pretty much uncovered everything, well, most everything, at its inception, and uncovered its motives, its reasonings, and their mindsets behind it. That should give you an understanding of their mindsets, because they weren't really trying to hide it from me. They were treating it like it was something to celebrate. My wife and her whole side of the family were literally celebrating that day, the county sheriff's decision to frame me. Now, I found out 2 weeks later that there was a double involved, and I found out that this double was brought into this around the same time my wife quit and the county sheriff took over the surrounding, filled out paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments. So basically, I know the beginning stages and steps of Portland Police and Multnomah County Sheriff's sting operations. They recruit the family members into the sting against their target. And then they fill out paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments so that they can surround the target. And at the same fucking time, they're selecting from their own ranks somebody they could use as a double. There, I've just identified the beginning steps of local authorities' sting operations. Oh, gee, I've also identified their mindsets behind it. It's something they do as a group mentality. It's something that they celebrate. They fucking have fun hinting at their victims. They don't give a shit if anybody figures it out. Therefore, when they do this to people, they treat it like it's a goddamn fucking sport. Now, to tell you how blatantly obvious it was, 3 days after they put the 72-hour notice on our next-door neighbor's apartment, I noticed when the next-door neighbors moved out, and 1 hour later, just 1 hour after, yeah, I smoke in the apartment. You know why? Because I'm surrounded by sting operatives. I don't give a shit if this goes against the goddamn fucking lease. Excuse me, the apartment manager is harboring sting operatives that are guilty of fucking murder. I don't think I'm going to give a fuck about the goddamn apartment manager's opinion. She's a part of this sting operation. She's just as guilty of homicides and attempted homicides as these police sting operatives are. She's harboring these bastards. They're not legally tenants. They don't legally live here. They have addresses elsewhere. They're not here to live here. They're here to frame and terrorize and provoke their targets, their victims, with intent to commit homicide. Therefore, they're not legally tenants. Therefore, they're illegally trespassing. I don't give a shit if law enforcement is renting these surrounding apartments. Legally speaking, only residents can live here. These people are not residents here. These people are undercover cops and they're whores and they're buddies and they're relatives, and they just take over the surrounding apartments so that they can terrorize and or murder off their victims. That does not make them residents. That does not make them tenants. Therefore, they're trespassing. They're automatically in violation of their lease because this is not their residence. Their mail doesn't go to these apartments. They're not, this apartment here, they're not getting mail because they're residents here. The people in that apartment, they're not getting mail because they're residents here. These people are fucking undercover cops. They don't live here. Therefore, they're fucking trespassing. And since I've already proved these officers committed a fucking homicide, multiple homicides, using these sting tactics, that the fucking apartment manager here is actually harboring these goddamn murderers. Therefore, she's guilty of harboring these criminals. But anyway, I'm getting off track. Suffice it to say, when the tenants moved out, when the county sheriff took over, put the 72-hour notices on the surrounding apartments, 3 days later, the old tenants were moving out, and quite literally, 1 hour, just 1 fucking hour after the old tenants moved out of the apartment next door to me, my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement pulled in with a moving van and began loading up in that apartment police equipment and office equipment. They were not loading in bedding or clothing or any normal things that normal tenants would be loading into that apartment. They were loading in what looked like specialized police equipment, specialized computer type equipment, and office equipment. This was 1999 when that occurred. The landlords that owned the property at the time never got to inspect that apartment, let alone to clean it. And law enforcement were, in a fascist manner, immediately took physical possession of this apartment. And in between loading that apartment with their police and office equipment, they were pulling out garbage bags, huge garbage bags, just like those garbage bags that, you know, that are under that table over there. Large garbage. They were pulling out large garbage bags that the old tenants left behind in the apartment, and were throwing these garbage bags out in the yard. So the apartment was not cleaned by the landlord. It wasn't even inspected by the landlord. And you know what? I stood out on the porch and watched these damn sting operatives move into this apartment. I stood out there to make them, because I already knew they were law enforcement. I already knew they were taking over this apartment. I already knew why they were taking over the apartment. I uncovered everything the day of its inception because my wife and her whole family were celebrating it, and they were having fun hinting at it in my presence. My wife's mother just blurted it out, and when I walked away from these people, they were all fucking talking about it, thinking I can't overhear. So I pretty much knew why law enforcement was taking over that apartment. And they were all giving me the fucking slant eye treatment, and were very silent as they carried their police equipment and office equipment back and forth, you know, into that, loading up that apartment with their crap. And I stood out there and had like 2 cigarettes and just watched them move in. I wanted them to feel uncomfortable. But of course, I made the decision at this point that I was debating on whether I should just leave my wife. I know the marriage is already over at this point. I'm debating on whether I should leave or if I should stay and prove it right under their fucking noses. My gut instinct under the circumstance was telling me, based on what I knew about what was going on, my gut instinct was telling me these people are bad people. My wife and everybody on her side of the family joined into a conspiracy with law enforcement to frame me for crimes, and that they've already made the decision to frame me. So I knew they don't give a shit that I'm innocent. I knew that I was quite literally under the belief that the decision was already, based on the information I had at hand, I had enough information to know that they had already made the decision that they're going to frame me as a pedophile. So I made the decision that if I leave, I won't be able to prove they're framing me, and they'll still frame me. But if I stay and act like I don't know what the fuck's going on, I had enough information to know how to prove this conspiracy right under their noses with minimal effort on my part. Now, I'm still debating at this time what I should do. I'm already aware of it. I'm not a coward. I'm not the type of person that's a coward or anything like that. I'm a good person. I have a history of saving lives. I have done a lot of good in this fucking world. I could actually prove I've done a lot of good in this world. There's many times in my lifetime where I've put my own neck on the line to help other people. So I'm a nice guy. And I'm not a chicken. And I was really pissed off at these people for this shit. And the one and only advantage I had at this time was the fact that I pretty much knew everything, and they all thought I knew nothing. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough to know that I'm being targeted by organized people that all decided they were going to set me up for felony crimes. And I knew that they're under the belief that I don't know what's going on. And I decided, well, that's an advantage I can take advantage of, because I can actually prove right under their fucking noses that they're setting me up. I was still debating at this point. I didn't make the decision yet. I didn't make the decision until after, as to what to do, until after these people in law enforcement took over the next door neighbor's apartment. And right after they got settled into that apartment, the very next day, my wife and her sister went shopping together. In other words, they met with law enforcement. And my wife and her sister from this point forward went every 2 to 3 days from this point forward shopping, and they never did this before. And this was their code for my wife and her family members to meet with law enforcement. They used it as their excuse for them to go out together and me not to go with my wife. And this was their excuse. And after these people in law enforcement took over the next door apartment, and they had one day to get settled in there, that's when my wife and her sister made up a bullshit excuse to go shopping together. And they met with law enforcement officers during this. And when they came back, when my wife came back, that's when she says to me, "Oh, we're all going to be going out of town for a day." And it was so blatantly obvious that she was following some sort of a plan that's not her plan. And that this is the reason why she was acting this way when she got back from this shopping trip, because she just met with law enforcement and they're telling her what to do next. And they were telling her to get the family out of town for a day. And it was just so blatantly obvious that these officers were directing my wife and her sister, directing their behaviors and their decisions and what the things that they were doing. And I picked up on that right away. It was just so, I don't know how to explain it other than to say that it was just so blatantly obvious that it wasn't her idea at all. She's just being told by her bosses in law enforcement to take the family out of town for a day so that they could bug the apartment. And she tried to make it seem like it was a natural decision on her part, and it was so blatantly not. I mean, it was just so fucking ridiculously blatant. But I went along with it and just said nothing. And so while my wife took me and our daughters out of town for a day, we went to the beach, and she paid for a motel, or no, not a motel, a hotel room. And we stayed the night at the beach. And when we got back, I was already expecting the apartment to be bugged by her buddies in law enforcement. I was already under the belief that they broke in, that my wife is getting us out of town so that her buddies in authority could bug the apartment. So when we came back, as soon as we walked through the door, I'm immediately scanning the living room. It's not this apartment. This was back in 1999. It's a completely different apartment. But I was immediately scanning my apartment, looking around, trying to see if anything was moved, checking to see if there was anything missing. You know, I wasn't looking necessarily to see if anything was missing. I was more interested in looking at the furniture and seeing if anything was moved. I didn't notice anything moved in the living room at all. I took special note to pay attention to the furniture's positions before we even left, because I was already suspecting that this was going to happen. So I was basically just looking around at the furniture, checking if anything was moved. I didn't see anything moved. Everything, all the furniture that was in our living room was exactly the way we left it. So I thinking to myself, maybe I might be wrong on this. I went and sat down on my chair, and as soon as I sat down, that's when I looked up and I kind of saw the ceiling, and there was a big fucking crack in the fucking ceiling that went from one side of the fucking wall all the fucking way over to the other side. It was a huge, extremely noticeable crack in the ceiling that was not there when we left for that day trip. So I realized at this point that everything that, I already, like I said, I was already expecting them to bug the apartment. So because their fat, donut-sucking asses did damage to my apartment, that pretty much demonstrates how they bugged the apartment. They put video and audio recording equipment in our attic. We lived in a duplex at the time, so there was no apartments above us. There was just an attic where there's a small attic that had, where they had the insulation and shit like that. The roof rafters and all that kind of shit, was up there. So I realized at this point, okay, I know where their recording equipment is. So now my wife noticed the damage herself about a minute after I noticed it. I was sitting in my chair, quite literally looking up at the damage. My wife was in the bathroom at the time. She just went straight to the bathroom when we got through the door. You know how women take over the bathroom when you're away from home for a while? The moment you get home, the women go straight to the bathroom because they got to go pee. And that's what my wife did. Well, when she came out of the bathroom, she stepped into the living room, and that's when she just looked up and she saw the crack in the ceiling. And I was already looking at the crack when she did this, and she was standing in the center, practically in the center of the living room when she did this. And I noticed her doing that, and I looked at her, and she's looking up at the fucking crack. She was literally looking up at the crack, and then she gets this big-ass fucking huge grin on her fucking face. And she didn't say a word. She had this big, excited grin on her fucking face, and she just grabbed her cell phone, and she went back to the bathroom. She made a beeline to the bathroom, and she was grinning from ear to ear. She didn't say a word until she got into the bathroom. When she got in the bathroom, she called her sister, Vicky Rosales, on the phone, and she told her sister that they cracked the ceiling. She's actually said they. And she was telling her sister Vicky that I didn't notice it. She's saying I didn't notice it. And then she's asking her sister Vicky, she's wanting her sister Vicky Rosales to come over to see it. Now keep in mind, she's in the bathroom about 20 feet away from me, having this conversation with her sister over the phone. She didn't want to have this conversation in front of me. She went into the bathroom to have this conversation. Now, I'm sitting in the living room 20 feet away. The TV's off. There's no noise whatsoever in the living room whatsoever. I'm just sitting there in my chair and just listening through the walls, my wife having this conversation with her sister. So when my wife hung up on her sister, she came out of the bathroom and she said absolutely nothing to me. She didn't look up at the cracked ceiling. She made no mention of the cracked ceiling to me, and she's pretending to not notice it. Now, the very next morning, at around 9 in the morning, my wife's sister, Vicky Rosales, came over pretending a visit, which is completely out of the ordinary because my wife's sister never comes over at 9 in the fucking morning. And she just knocked at the door, and I answered the door, and there's my wife's sister, Vicky Rosales, and she said, "Hi, just thought I'd come over for a visit to say hi." And she's grinning like a fucking Cheshire cat. And she walks into the living room. She gets pretty much dead center in the living room, and she just looks straight up. She's not even hiding this from me. She just looks straight up at the cracked ceiling. And my wife is like 4 or 5 feet away from Vicky Rosales, and she's facing Vicky Rosales, and she's grinning like a Cheshire cat from ear to ear. And when Vicky Rosales looked down, she's looking straight at my wife. They're looking at each other face to face, and they're just fucking grinning like Cheshire cats. And then they just start making small talk and completely avoid talking about that cracked ceiling. Now, this is a very key and important moment. Because I'm aware that they're setting me up. I'm aware that they're hooked up with people in law enforcement. I'm aware their buddies in law enforcement took over the surrounding apartments. I'm aware that this is the reason why my wife wanted me out of town for a day. And I'm aware that they're committing felony fucking crimes, breaking into my home and illegally bugging it, and that they treat this whole fucking thing like it's a goddamn fucking sport. It was that moment right there when I made the decision. I was so pissed. I was so angry. I was burning with anger at this moment. I determined I'm going to prove this on their fucking nose if it's the last goddamn fucking thing I do. I had enough information to know what they're guilty of, what they are involved in, the tactics they're using. I understood their mindsets behind it. I didn't realize that this whole situation at this point was going to escalate into a murder conspiracy. I had the situation well pegged and just misjudged the size of it. I knew this was personal. I knew it was county sheriffs that were the masterminds of this shit, and that they generally treat this shit like it's a goddamn sport, and because of it, the civilians that they recruit into these operations also tend to think of it and treat it as a goddamn sport, and they never give a fuck if their victims or anybody else suspect or know. And I basically had this whole thing well pegged and just misjudged the size of it. At this point, I was under the belief I'm the only target. I was not their only target. They were targeting other people. They were targeting other members of my side of the family at that time, and possibly others as well that I was unaware of. At this point, I knew everybody on my wife's side of the family and at least 2 to 3 people in law enforcement were guilty of criminal conspiracy to frame me as a pedophile. And I basically uncovered it the day of its inception. Now, I had more than enough information to know how to prove it. I knew they openly talk about it anytime they're together. That's very vital information. Anytime my wife is talking to any family members of hers, they're talking about this. Gee, how predictable and catchable on an audio recorder could that be? Very easily catchable and predictable. Now, keep in mind, they think I don't know, so their guards were down. They think I'm completely